countdown for when it goes live? Because sometimes it's just like we're live and it's like 5 seconds ago.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes that happens, but tonight it did not happen. Tonight you were the countdown, and we are live here to chat about what television we watched this week. I'm so excited. I'm literally beside myself to talk about Miss Scarlet and the Duke. So much so that I couldn't even wait within the last 24 hours. I was like word vomiting to Kate and Carey last night all of my very passionate thoughts about this latest season. And I can't wait to dive into it. I even went so far as to this is like gross nerd alert. I wrote discussion questions. Wow, too much. Kate, Carrie, how are you guys feeling tonight? How was your week? Do you bring me any news?
My week was pretty good. I have a little bit of news. So maybe 10 minutes before we got on live, I saw there is a new show on Hulu called Death and Other Details. And I watched the trailer, and that is the amount of information I have. Um, it looks good. It looks something that's up our alley because we consistently watch these unique murder mysteries. It
Yeah.
looks more like a drama than the other stuff we've previously watched, but it still seems to have a bit of humor, and it has more of a they're on a cruise ship, and it has the bit of he was the world's greatest detective, but is he still? And
Mm.
she is the main character is a suspect in the murder, but then ends up helping him in the investigation, and Interpol is in part of it. That's a bit about the premise that you get from the trailer.
That sounds so good. You'll recall like right before the strike. Well, maybe even before that a bit, because there was obviously pandemic related disruptions. All of us were theorizing that we were moving out of an age of superheroes and moving into an age of mystery. And across the genres and across the age spectrum, obviously we're going to be talking about Miss Scarlet and the Duke tonight, but also, you had the Knives Out movie sequence. You had Enola Holmes as like a more kiddie version. Give me a minute, and I could probably list a bunch. Obviously, we had some classic remakes of Agatha Christie as well. And it really felt like we were kind of shifting, but really stumbling into the age of the mystery. Only Murders in the Building, our most recent classic example, our mutual fave. It it makes me wonder how long this age of mystery will stretch out. I'm hopeful that because of the disruptions and because of the strike, because of all of that, we're actually going to get to sit with it for a while, and we'll get a resurgence of more mysteries afterwards. But as we went into the kind of somewhat TV desert that we're in right now, I had said on here, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a lot of social deception shows, which just these past 2 weeks, we've seen a ton of social deception shows drop. We've got The Traitor, we've got the Traitor is currently airing on network television. The Trust is currently dropping in installments on Netflix, and those are just one of many, The Mole, etc., that have come out kind of during this, where we have people often, in the case of The Traitor, it's actually actors, but they're in a reality show, so they're not having to act, so it doesn't violate the strike in these social deception situations. And I see that as kind of a continuance of our fixation with mysteries, murder mysteries in particular, or espionage and that kind of thing. So I am happy to hear that even more mystery shows are continuing to come out.
Dig it. Um, I am doing well enough on a Wednesday, so almost Friday. That's always a good deal. I
Cheers.
don't have any news unless something pops into my head during our conversation, but I don't believe that I do.
Another example of a murder mystery espionage thing that's getting remade is Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Donald Glover, and I do not know the actress's name that is playing Mrs. Smith. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Smith might be my favorite like action, romantic, whatever of all time. I'm a sucker for like the toxic, awful, like chemistry and whatever that went on there. Present day as a normal, well-adjusted person, I think Brad Pitt is awful, but at the time that was like so good. I'm interested to see what a modern remake of that looks like. We'll see. Well, the only news that
Well,
I bring.
and
Oh,
you
go ahead.
mentioned the reboot, the modern reboot. I was just going to mention, you mentioned a modern reboot, and I also remember that they've announced, I think on Netflix, a one-day reboot where it was that Anne Hathaway movie
Oh, yeah.
from maybe like 2009.
Mhm.
And now there's a modern miniseries.
That'll be cool. I'm looking forward to that. You know, I never actually watched that movie, the old Anne Hathaway one. I should, as a setup for this. The only news I bring
I
is
think I
Keith
watched it,
Army
and I think I watched it
playoffs.
way too young.
There's a delay. Bear with us. Go ahead.
Oh no. I think I watched one day, but I was way too young to watch it, and this delay is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it is. It's like 5 seconds long. We'll make it work. The only news that I bring is that the Chiefs are in the playoffs. It's award season, so with the Golden Globes. We all saw the like flop of the host there being painfully unfunny, and then we had I think it was the Emmys, and Chelsea Handler did a great job. It was great. A bunch of shows won awards, and specifically The Bear won a lot of awards, which I haven't seen yet, but I really feel like I should because, as I understand it, it's like cooking and romance and drama, which are like my three favorite things. So we'll have to watch that. The only thing this is so shallow. This is so shallow. The only thing that's keeping me from watching The Bear is the guy, that like lead guy on The Bear. I'm so sure he does like a great job. I'm sure whatever, but he is not even remotely attractive, like not even a little bit. And like I think he's supposed to be like a point in a love triangle, like multiple women are into him, and I just can't take that seriously. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. I know like everybody's thirsting after him right now. I just like I really don't know if I can like take it seriously seeing multiple women be into him. But more on that story at 11. Anyways, that is the news. Because of the, you know, lack of TV right now, and everything's kind of going to start premiering again at the beginning of February after the Super Bowl. We've all seen that. I've actually been forced to watch a lot of movies, so that's what we're going to talk about on my end when we get to what else we watched this week. But we did get gifted a one really good episode of television that we all were fortunate to watch, and that was Miss Scarlet and the Duke. So, what do you say? We dive right in. And as I said, I was a nerd and I wrote questions for this week. So, this season, more than before, it seems to me that the source of conflict is work rather than each other. Does it feel that way to you guys? And is the conflict so far, with 2 episodes now out there, working?
Okay, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I mean, the interesting thing about their dynamic is there is definitely romantic undertones, as much as Carey kind of resists them. But it is primarily a story about these two people that do trust each other and want to work together, but are kind of at odds because of their position, and they have to abide by their own moral code. And William is more held to following the rules that he's supposed to follow as a cop and getting the cops in order and serving that side. And she's more concerned with being able to maintain the company at large and is more willing to break laws to get that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that always tends to drive the conflict interpersonally, but they're both now at a professional state where they have more responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, it's been more, she's a one-woman show and she has a handful of people that she pays, but it's all kind of consultant rather than you're my employee. And now she has the much bigger pressure of maintaining this company. And he has to maintain what is, I think, 3 or 4 different branches of the police force because of what's going on there. And I think it's motivating them to kind of, I think naturally they've been leaning towards this in previous seasons anyway, but that level of, they just have so much responsibility that they can't take swipes at each other anymore. So they just understand you have to do this because you have no choice, and I have to do this because I have no choice. It's not personal. It's just what has to happen. They're still going to argue. They're still going to squabble, and they still do that, but it's not to the same extent, and it's nowhere near as personal. And part of that comes from their own maturity, and part of that comes from their responsibility of their positions.
What's interesting to me about what these first 2 episodes have established is the question obviously has to be, well, what is the solution to both of the problems that they face, right? And it sort of like hits you right in the face. You can see it clear as day what the solution should be. But the question is, I would suspect, is it a solution that both of them could sort of live with, considering their backgrounds and what's important to them, right? Because the solution seems to me like, hey, we're both hitting our heads against the ceiling in terms of something that we can't control. So why don't we combine our forces? Seems like the easy solution, right? But is it a solution that they can both sort of deal with, and sort of like, can she say, hey, well, I want to save this business and do it myself? Could she be like, well, I need you to come in and help with this to make it work? And can he say, well, you know what, I'm going to give up this line of law enforcement that I've been in to try something new and different? And so it's like, is that the solution that they both can deal with? Or as a viewer, are we forced to have to deal with, well, what are solutions to the problems that they have that are different than them combining forces? Do we want to deal with a series or an episode where where the Duke has to sort of deal with a financial crisis? I mean, that's kind of boring. Do we really want to go that route? And we've had a couple of episodes already of basically Scarlet having to basically piecemeal this company that she has together. It's like, do we want to continue to see that, or are we basically going to say, hey, let's get these 2 folks together? It'd just be interesting to see if they can both narratively sort of deal with that solution. But that feels like where we're going.
Yeah. As we've seen them develop through seasons 1 through 3, while there's been kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach, we've seen the resolution that you both are describing in terms of, since there's some character growth here, they can't continue to just fight in the same way. But at the same time, this season sort of feels like it's testing whether the show can subvert the moonlighting curse. Now, I know we all don't believe in the moonlighting curse, but stay with me. With the moonlighting curse, if you have 2 people get together and there is no other conflict or plot, then the show becomes boring. And what this season feels like it's doing, what I guess I hope it's doing, is it's testing whether they're not together yet. But before they're together, if they stop fighting quite as much with each other, and they're more so, there's this external conflict, and they maybe have different ways of approaching it. But just because she has this, sort of generalized approach of like the ends always justify the means, and he always has an approach of no, the means are most important, and if it's, if we're not taking the right path, then we can't get there. They're both working towards a same goal, just with sometimes slightly different ways, but with a lot less interpersonal conflict. Are we still as invested? Because there's a lot of shows where I openly, and I would say the majority of the audience, not so openly, does not care a bit about the plot. We are only watching for interpersonal. So if they took out the interpersonal conflict and they only replaced it with plot, like there was literally just, Miss Scarlet and the Duke were working perfectly together, but there's these big bad whatever, that kind of thing, that would still be boring. There still has to be a little bit of conflict in how they're approaching things, but now it feels like they're right now it feels like they're facing the same direction. Kate, jump in.
So I kind of agree to an extent. It does feel like they're prepping for the "Can we survive the moonlighting curse," quote unquote. But I think a lot of it has to do with they're almost sure it's going to happen and sure it'll work, and now they're just having to kind of build it up and reassure themselves and the audience, because they are very much leaning more into we as a duo, our personal relationship, we have less conflicts. We still have some, but they're less, and they're quicker and they're easily resolved, and it's more because they both have hot tempers than anything else.
Yeah.
And then the professional conflicts are still there. And I don't think they'll ever be able to fully separate them because, you're human, and I don't think that ever truly can happen. But they are trying to kind of make it a very clear distinction about this is personal, this is professional. I think where they're heading with it, though, honestly, is I could really see them using this hurt comfort setup that we have at the end of this episode to really lean into, okay, from now on, once they fully commit, once they're in a relationship or however they're going to stage it, the interpersonal conflicts are more going to be of concern and potentially jealousy and of safety, because that's part of what they've been really leaning into. They've always had a very physical concern for each other's safety. But I would say in the past 2 episodes, it's been expressed several times.
Yeah.
And obviously that was set up for foreshadowing. But I think that's something that they're also seeing, that if we can have it be more of a concern when it comes, like when it bleeds into interpersonal, then it will be able to build better. Look at Ivy. So Ivy and Eliza have a really strong bond, but Ivy really doesn't care too much about her business. She very much cares about Eliza specifically, but has to sometimes chastise and or condone Eliza because so much of her personal life is her professional life. And I think it's a show that has to blur those lines. But I think they are trying to figure out how they're going to build this up and keep it as separated as possible while still having a good bit of both, and allowing them to mature and grow up and assume responsibility for the positions they are in, as well as the responsibility of being adults in a relationship.
You've talked a little bit about, in the last 2 episodes, how they've increased this focus on their concern for their physical safety, or at least they've been more transparent about it to each other. And I also see, because I do have a one-track mind, a increase in the last 2 episodes of, I guess, William in particular being casually transparent with his feelings. Not just transparent, but casually transparent. We got in the first episode, she's like, "You look tired." He's like, "You look beautiful," right? So that's a comment exchange that's physicality focused. And then on his end, obviously it's romantic. And then also at the end of the last episode, the dinner request when it wasn't their monthly dinner, that kind of thing. So but in both instances, unlike the usual, they kind of breathe at each other's necks for half a minute before saying something slightly nice. It was actually very casual from him. So did you expect or want that tone shift going into this season? And do you see a similar shift or a different shift or any shift at all for Eliza going into this season?
I was very complimentary last season about how I felt like they were really building up, that they were still arguing a good bit last season, but there was hints of what they're building towards now, where there was more understanding and respect when they fought, and understanding and respect when they talked and made when they helped each other. I think it was intentionally derailed when they had the love triangle arc. And I think it's
Tomato,
meant to
tomato,
set them,
tomato.
boo, we don't like it. Yes, but I
Even though
mean,
we
I
like
think they
kind
did
of
that
toxically
intentionally
did,
because
just
it
like a
was,
little bit.
yes. Well, it was very short-lived, and it very much served this purpose to really force Eliza to take a step back and analyze how she felt about the situation. And I mean, she's continuing to still deny out loud. I don't think it says deny on the inside in her internal monologue, but she is far more walled up and less vulnerable than William is.
He referred to them as brother and sister, episode 2. Like, we can't just glaze over that. That's a
Yeah,
le-
that I
that's a wild level of denial. That's
yeah.
low key crazy. Someone needs to talk sense to her.
Well, and I felt that was very poignant with the clear foreshadowing of the injury that was happening, that he was so concerned for her safety, and she then will knowingly use that to manipulate him into following her to a location, and then her saying that I'm your annoying little sister, and none of that was coming from him. It was all her, and it's the deny, and I think a lot of it comes from in season 3. It was very clear he had come to that realization of I want her, but how is that going to happen? And I don't think that they
I
fully
thought
gave
she had
resolution.
come to that realization too in season 3. Am I crazy? Is this revisionist
No, you're
history on
not.
my part?
You're not. But it's the internal acceptance versus external acceptance are two different things. She's forced to recognize that for herself, and Ivy is consistently pointing it out to her, but she refuses to actually say it out loud, and she refuses to act upon it or say anything towards it, except if it's to her benefit with what she wants elsewise.
I mean, it makes her sound bad when you put it that way.
Well, so here's the question, right? Based on what's been set up and what we're anticipating coming, right? So the question is like which path does Eliza take, right? In this situation with William being hurt, does she take the approach of, oh no, I need to be there for him because he's always been there for me, and in that process, she starts to tap into those feelings and emotions that Cammie feels like that she's already sort of established, but this is an opportunity for her to take them forward. Does she go that route, or does she say, well, how can I allow myself to feel these emotions and feelings for someone whose job it is and whose sort of life it is puts them in harm all the time? Can I
Mhm.
open myself up to that, knowing that there's the potential for it to end in a terrible way? Does she want to do that?
Mm. So you feel like it's possible, especially since it's so early in the season, that we're gonna get all the lovely like hurt comfort trope moments where, she's shocked out of her mind and, realizes how much she, has these feelings for William, whatever, as, he comes back from the brink of death, a la Gilbert in Anna Green Gables type of energy, but that's actually potentially going to push her away because it's going to bring back all that trauma of her father being in a dangerous profession and or her father passing and all of that, and she doesn't want to allow these sort of like casual emotions of like, oh, I'm your family, whatever, with somebody who could potentially be consistently in harm's way. And then we're going to get this like angsty separation in order to like preserve her own emotions.
I hope not, but possibly.
You're probably right. I hate it.
So I have a theory based on that conversation.
Yes, go ahead.
Um, on just more of a structural level, that next episode is going to be episode 3. Watching the trailer, it mainly looked like most of the episode is going to be flashbacks. It could be wrong. It could
Yep.
be editing. They could have just decided to only have the flashbacks in the trailer, but I kind of feel like probably not.
hmm
So when we get back for season or episode 4, that's going to be the episode where he's actually convalescing, recovering, and she's going to be the fretting or the running away, whichever it ends up being.
hmm
That'll put us is it 6 episodes or 8 episodes? I think it's 8 episodes. That
I
still
think
puts
it's
us
8.
halfway.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not a ton of time for them to have the no, run away, and then do the switch at the end, especially since it's consistent that the last episode or even last 2 episodes are more focused on who has been the overarching issue. And this one's clearly going to be more of a like political or sociopolitical problem with the police force and the people within the House of Lords, or I can't remember what they were called. That's going to be the bigger confrontation at the end. It's still going to have something to do with crime, obviously, but it's going to be chasing down some amount of corruption or something like that, probably finding out exactly why Fitzroy's dad was so hesitant to work and so immediately angry at any suggestion to follow any of like William's recommendations or help. And I think that's going to be like the last 2 episodes. So that really doesn't leave a ton of time for her to do the runaway bit and then come back and, or like the end. We've also already done the runaway bit several times. And the last time, kind of what you were saying about how it feels like revisionist history, is we got to see her kind of come to terms with, oh, I feel something for him. But then the jealousy and the love triangle bit of it all is a typical TV trope where she sees him have a relationship and goes, oh, I've been here the whole time. So clearly if he has a relationship, but it wasn't with me, that means he's not interested in me at all. And even if I feel this way, deny. So him saying like casual vulnerabilities, like, and you're beautiful, for her, she just hears that as like a given and obviously, but doesn't take that in as an actual romantic compliment. That she just takes it in as like he was just trying to ignore the fact that he looked tired. And we're going on that path. And I honestly think that this is going to be the reserve where he says something in his sleep or, whatever trope we're going to pull.
Oh,
and
like
she's going to have to fully admit to herself what she feels.
Love that. That would be great.
Yes.
Love a mid-season reveal.
But that is like just
love
the
theory that they don't have the pinnacle, like the, like love confession, etc. moment in the final 2 episodes, but dedicate the final 2 episodes to the plot. I think that would be interesting because then we get like a denouement, like we get to see them like be, their relationship is resolved, they're together, they're working on being together, something to that effect for the final 2 episodes as they're fighting the big bad. So often, I would say most often, you do have those like final romantic moments in the finale also, right when the big bad is arriving. But let's talk about the big bad, because the cases vary per week, in a general sense, but the show consistently kind of lightly dabbles in social issues of the time. So they've talked about class consciousness, racism, sexism, quite a lot of things, really. So far this season, we don't have a lot in terms of that, or really in terms of plot in general. It's a lot of setup, it's a lot of hint at plot. But what's working, what's not working, what from past seasons do you want to see carried forward? What do you want to see them in terms of big bad or plot or whatever bring into season 4?
You can go first,
That
Carey.
is probably going to be a better question for Kate, because I'll tell you this, right? And it goes back to something I sort of always said, right? About like, hey, when I'm watching the show, right? I always equate it to like a party or an event, right? And it's like, if these 2 people are at the event, it doesn't matter what the event is, I'll be there to see it because it's interesting, right? So
That's how I feel about this show and
and
most
so
shows.
in terms of what the plot is or what they're sort of up against is always just sort of whatever this obstacle has to be for them to make whatever revelations they need to make in their personal and professional life. So in that respect, what they set up this year, in terms of this whole situation with law enforcement not being funded to the levels that it needs to be, I guess in terms of sort of placing it in the plot, I think this might be an opportunity for Eliza to sort of, what's the guy's name? Fitzroy, the basically the head of
William
the head.
Fitzroy, or is it
Yeah,
Fitzroy William? It's
I'm
William
Oliver
Fitzroy, right?
Fitzroy.
yeah, that dude, right?
Well,
So this, yeah, the guy who's essentially in charge of the purse strings, or basically telling William all the time that we got
Oh,
more
I
money.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, go
So
ahead.
yeah. So I think narratively this would be an opportunity for her to sort of wage a one-woman war to basically say, hey, your terrible funding initiative is what got this dude shot and basically fighting for his life. So that could be narratively what she takes on. And also having that reporter in her pocket right now might be an
Hmm.
opportunity for her to say, hey, this is an opportunity for me to expose this, unless there are some changes made. And those changes might, whatever those changes might be, could probably be sort of the sort of next obstacle or the next sort of thing that Eliza and William have to sort of navigate together. That's probably would be new for them, but it's still sort of a conflict of like, does she join law enforcement? Does she come in more often in terms of helping with cases? I feel like that might be some sort of conflict that they could sort of organically bring her in, with that storyline that sort of makes sense. Otherwise, it's just like, well, what are we going to do with it? And I could see once she realizes or once she learns that they went rushing into this building unmanned, well, not unmanned, but essentially outmanned, and this was the result. I can't see her letting that sort of sit and abide by that. So I could see narratively her picking that up.
He can then work with them and they can be in a relationship, but because they can't disclose that they're in a relationship because they're coworkers, it can be like one of those like undercover relationship things, and that can give some tension. Okay, Kate, what are your thoughts?
I think generally I do like, and I pretty much agree with that. They'll probably use this setup as a she's not a sit by the bedside and dab your forehead with a wet cloth character. She might do it like for a scene, but that's not her character. That's not what she's going to do. She
Right.
is going to go out and she is going to cause trouble and bring attention because she has feelings and she is going to make them well known. Um, and I think honestly, the show has a habit of balancing these setting based issues, so the very clear sexism, racism, class consciousness, um, as a backdrop and as almost like an invisible main character that is like the third main character in the show.
Hmm.
And sometimes it goes well. I think that their handling of class consciousness is well done. I think sometimes their handling of like sexism is very poorly done.
Hmm.
They there's moments, there's key little scenes that it's done really well. Normally it's very interpersonal. So the conversation she had with the woman that inherited the Undertaker, yeah,
Hmm.
that I think those conversations were really well done. But every time she meets somebody new, she has to say the same catchphrase about, yes, I know, I am a lady detective, let's get over it. And like, yes, that is a clear, obvious representation of what would be happening, but there
Hmm.
is you're going overboard. Please, for the sake of the audience, figure out a better way of handling that because it's very canned. Um, I think the police issue is kind of somewhere in the middle where I think the setup is not being done very smoothly or deftly, but I could see where it has a better payoff because a lot of times the social commentary is not integrated with the main storyline. It
Hmm.
is just kind of this random third part that's happening in the background, and then it's not utilized. It does seem like this one's going to be more integral to the story of the season, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to play it more of the political approach, but or more just like this this is an important part of how our society functions, good or bad,
Hmm.
and for it to continue to function how we had it set up, and for the people that work in that system to survive, you need to better manage those systems because you know basically forcing them all into one location and firing them all doesn't save anybody, just makes the few that are left, even in more danger. And I think she's going to put that approach on it rather than anything political, just because when they do social commentary, they try to keep it fairly neutral, more just like this is the thing, and just go with it that way. But I could definitely see them using this background story far more prominently than they have before. And I'm going to keep a hopeful idea of that, because I think they are playing it more of how they play the class consciousness than anything else.
Yeah, I think the show, when they do tackle issues, they have this really nice balance in a lot of cases where they are overt and spell things out for the period of time that they're talking about. So when they're talking about a particular sexism issue related to Eliza can't get hired because she's a lady detective, they spell it out. They make it clear. And if you only watched one episode, you're still going to get that message, whatever. But the tie-ins to present day aren't so obvious, so in your face, where you're kind of getting hit over the head of like, and also this is how it exists in present day as well. They let the viewer kind of make that connection, but maybe guide them to it. I think the same thing kind of occurs when the show has occasionally talked about topics of racism, class consciousness. I think is probably the one that they've done best. With this, when we're coming to talking about essentially the management of government services, that's where it's like, okay, I get that I get that they're going to be subtle, but I also feel like this could really go either way. So I'm gonna sit and wait. But they've earned my trust. It's PBS. I'm gonna let it slide and mind my business for at least 3 to 5 more episodes, possibly, maybe. Well, we have already answered my last question, which is what do y'all want to see next the rest of the season? So it's now time for our 3-ish minute rundown of what else we watched this week. So, Carey, I'll let you go first. Take a few minutes and tell us what else you watched this week, or really 2 weeks. I need to find a better way to phrase that.
Well, I did watch I think it's 5 episodes of Marvel's Echo. They dropped them all on one day, but I decided to watch them one day at a time because I'm old and I don't like to binge things. Um,
That's good. That's
what I
healthy.
what I will say about the series is there are a number of things that Marvel did incredibly well with the series. They were incredibly respectful. They did a lot of research as it relates to, I think it's the Choctaw um, Indians that the story was based upon. They did a lot of fantastic research in terms of bringing in consultants and that sort of thing, and it obviously informed the story that they told and how they told the story, as well as obviously telling the story of a deaf hero. All of those things were fantastically done, tastefully done, and also sort of like in terms of how those things were shot, particularly from the viewpoint of a deaf character, in terms of in some scenes how sort of the ambient sounds that you heard, sometimes you didn't hear anything, sometimes you
Mhm.
heard things from her perspective where you would only hear her heartbeat because that's what she feels because it's right there, and so you got that perspective. And then there was a perspective that you would have in some scenes where um, obviously a great number of the scenes that she was interacting in, the main character, a lot of the other characters also were ASL sign language, and so
Mhm.
there was that communication aspect of it. But there were a number of situations where the other character might not have known sign language, so you sort of had that perspective of the inability to communicate and seeing it from her perspective and how frustrating or vulnerable that could very well make you, particularly in a scene where it's sort of life and death. We are talking about heroes and villains and that sort of thing. So those things were done incredibly well. The only issue that I have, and it's sort of an issue I have with a great number of Marvel products, and it's either an issue you're going to have or you're just going to say, hey, this is what it is. But when you have such an interconnected universe that builds on itself and sort of expands to a great degree, sometimes you feel like a story that you are watching is sort of in service of so many other things, right? It's like
Hmm.
I'm watching this show because I care about this character and I want to get to know what she's about and what she's up against. And to a great degree, they did those things, but it's just really hard to ignore when the character that she is most closely associated with is the Kingpin, who is essentially the Thanos of like street level villainy. It's sort of like if you were watching a series about either Gamora or a series about Nebula, it's like fantastic. You get to learn about those characters, but also you have to realize and understand that basically those characters, depending on what time you're meeting them, are in service of Thanos, who is around, and so it's going to some degree, start becoming Thanos' story. And so that was sort of and again, I knew what I was getting into when you went into it, right? It's like, okay, she's basically not the daughter of Kingpin, but essentially for narrative purposes, she is. And so I don't want to say that he always overshadowed her, but he does cast a pretty big freaking shadow. Um, so I love the relationship that they had, and I love the relationship that they showed between the two, going back to when she was younger and he was essentially, to a great degree, her caretaker and sort of like sent her on this path. I can't say that I obviously like the path that he sent her on because it was a path of being sort of a villain, and he was essentially feeding on her vulnerability, her anger, and frustration, and he took that and he molded that into a sharp point and pointed her in a direction that was for no good. And so, what the series was about was her sort of trying to figure out, or at least getting to a point where she could get beyond that. And so, in that respect, I like what the story did that way. And I also like the fact that the story tried to get to it also balanced that by showing, or at least giving a really good idea of how she could overcome where she came from and the anger and guilt
Mhm.
and frustration that she had, but also why Kingpin was not able to do the same. Um, Lastly, if you're familiar with, I don't know if you saw Thor: Love and Thunder. Um,
Mm-mm,
so with, yeah, I'm pretty sure you don't care if anything gets spoiled.
I don't.
One of the more divisive, and I'm pretty sure you don't care if I spoil like a plot point in Echo, or do you?
Think I mind if you spoil Echo because so far everything you've said about it kind of sells it to me. Like it makes me want to watch it. This idea of like a backstory and a focus on empathy for somebody who does not necessarily become more redeemable over the course of the show in any way.
Yeah. And one of the things that helped her get to that point was the way the story was told. Essentially, because in the comics, the character of Echo, she gets that name because she's able to sort of mimic the physical abilities of whatever person that she might be up against. It's sort of like what Taskmaster does, it just on a sort of different level. And that's why she has the name Echo in the comics. One of the reasons that they were able to establish in the series is that she has the name Echo because a great deal of this story dealt with her ancestors and the sort of spirit and ability and tenacity and things that her ancestors had that they were able to pass down the bloodline, that during the course of the series that she was sort of able to come to come to grips is not the right word, but essentially it's she was able to get a clarity in terms of what all of that meant, that in terms of the people that came before her, how they inform who she is and how she can use that ability to sort of help people. um, I say all that, and it's really difficult not to watch the episode and get the sort of cliched magical Native American sort of energy
Hmm.
that sort of happened um, at the end of the series, and I am not I'm not sort of perturbed or have an issue with most of how they handle that. I did have one issue with sort of the over the top magical aspect of it, and it's sort of the same criticism that Thor: Love and Thunder got without spoiling anything. But there's one thing to say, hey, I can call upon and feel my ancestors and take upon their knowledge and power and that sort of thing. But it's a wholly different thing to say I can pull upon that and then all of a sudden it becomes even more magical in terms of the Marvel way that I wasn't expecting from a show that was being advertised as like grounded, really street level. Let's get back to what the Netflix Marvel shows were. There were
Mm.
There was plenty of bare bones. Hey, we've got a mature rating, or and we're going to take advantage of it, and they did. I was just sort of kind of surprised that they mixed in this amount of the fantastical as well. But overall, I do wish it might have been like maybe an episode or two longer. It was only 5 episodes, but I think they did what they needed to do. It was a good opportunity to tell her story, and let's just be real. It was an opportunity to set up what the Kingpin is going to be in this new Marvel universe, and also um, basically what Daredevil is going to be. And to their credit, they did not inundate us with a whole bunch of Daredevil, so it wasn't they didn't over marvel it with that character. But it's enough to know that yeah, we better get ready for what Marvel is going to do with these characters. So we'll see. If those two shows or whatever turn out to be the best thing that the MCU has done in a long time, then maybe my thoughts and feelings about what Echo had to sacrifice to get there will change. But if those shows are just okay, yeah, I'm probably going to be even more upset.
It's interesting that you mentioned that there's moments where they seem to jump the shark with a kind of a cultural, spiritual element that then gets Marvelized. Because all of the promo that I've seen for the show does market it as kind of gritty realism. So that is interesting that they have that come through at the end. I won't take too much more time because I know we're coming up to time. So I'll just take a couple minutes and then I'll give it to Kate. I mentioned up at the top that social deception shows are happening, that I just cannot recommend them highly enough. They are just chef's kiss, whether you're watching The Trader, whether you're watching The Trust, whether you're watching any of those. I have been watching all of them, and that is the reality television that you want, even if you don't know that you want it. Once you get into it, no going back. That is cream of the crop. I've also been forced to watch movies this week due to the lack of television. Kate mentioned last time we talked Love at First Sight. I did watch that. That was cheesy and comforting and wonderful. Been listening to the soundtrack pretty much ever since. It was absolutely flawless soundtrack, absolutely no realism to that show at all. But they did a great job with what I will go ahead and say is a Gen Z rom-com. So that was quite a feat. I also watched Anyone But You, which is a zillennial rom-com, I will say. Also reference to Much Ado About Nothing. It's like a modern remake of Much Ado About Nothing. It is so cute. It is everything that you want in a rom-com, except for I feel like there were a couple cheesy moments with the male lead where it didn't really sell to me. But I think that it suffered, and this is going to sound absolutely crazy because everybody who's seen interviews with them, myself included, has been like, "Oh, this seems like a couple in their first week of sleeping together." Like it's just like there's such crazy palpable chemistry. Nobody will shut up about it in real life. In the movie, I could have had him be just a bit more into her, which is crazy. It's literally Sydney Sweeney, but it suffers from just this the teensiest bit of that like modern problem of men not seeming, male actors in particular, but men not seeming into women or not seeming into women enough. It could use a bit more. It could use a bit more of the energy that he brings to all their real life interviews. Anyways, and I also watched Boys in the Boat, which is like a rowing real life documentary of people winning the Olympics. And I love a good like sports winning story for whatever reason. Basically, because it's the same thing as a romance if you really think about it. All right, Kate, the time is yours. Talk to us about what you watched this week, and then we'll wrap up with a lightning fast round of Women of the Week.
Mhm. I watched the most recent 2 episodes of Percy Jackson. Um, I so far have liked those 2 episodes the most. I will also say, because I read the book just a few weeks before I started watching the show, I like what they did with that point in the story in the show more than I did in the movie, and I recognize that that is sacrilege, not only because I'm a book lover, but I have talked to people who love and adore the Percy Jackson series, and that is the wrong answer, apparently. Which is not unexpected, and it's fine. But I liked what they did. It made more sense. It sped up the pace, because I think part of my issue with the book is it's very choppy in speed. It's like they run into one small little hill and then they get over that one, and then one small little hill and they get over that one. It feels like you're reading a very episodic thing while you're reading a book, and I don't love that pacing, but it's just not for everybody, and that's fine. But I think the show is doing a really great job. It is still child actors, and sometimes you do feel it's strongly that it's a lot of child actors, but for the most part, I think they're doing a really great job. I also read The Poppy Wars this week, which is, I think it's been out for several years now, but it's a fantasy novel that I didn't know what it was about. I just knew it was really popular and it was considered pretty dark. And so I was like, oh, I'll try it. I started reading it. In the first half, it is kind of like military school. She comes from a very poor region and is a orphan and lives with this foster family who don't treat her very well. So she teaches herself at night to be smart enough to pass these entrance exams to the nation's military school, and it's the only school you can get into for free. She gets in, and it is almost the entire first half of the book, her training at this military school, and then war hits. And the war hitting is where it gets dark, and because I didn't read anything about the book, didn't realize until I was well into it, this is based very, very specifically on the Second Sino-Japanese War. And there is a scene that replicates the Nanking massacre. And it is very dark and very graphic. It was an excellent book. It is actually a trilogy. I want to finish it, but I had to pace myself. I will return to it, but I can't finish it right now because it is very dark, especially when I had heard it was dark. But then the first half wasn't that bad. So I was like, over-exaggerated, because there is something to be said with it's in the 17-year-old's perspective. So I thought maybe it was people that were reading it thinking it was YA or that kind of thing, which I think part of it might be. But it is a dark, dark turn that I was not prepared for. So I had to take a minute to pause.
I think with any book like that, especially if it's going to, reference a specific historical event or can be kind of loosely following a specific historical event, even just calling that out at the beginning, like I'm not even talking like it has to be like a page of trigger warnings, but just in some way, in a nice, whether it be the prologue or whether it be an author's note at the beginning, noting that it, loosely references this or follows that, whatever, is enough of a heads up of like, okay, this, could get dark. But maybe it's too much of a spoiler word. I don't know. Let us know how the rest of that series goes. We will hop right on round. Well, we'll go backwards actually. Carey, I'm gonna save you to the end for a reason that is sitting in the chat. I will quickly knock off my Woman of the Week. It is unsurprisingly Sarah Rafferty. I watched the new Netflix show that she is in called My Life with the Walter Boys. Unfortunately, it's a like sibling love triangle. Y'all know I hate that. But if you ignore the children entirely, the show's fantastic. Sarah Rafferty plays the mother of like 5 billion children and also a veterinarian surgeon for like three adjacent counties. It's fantastic. I somehow don't even have a preference on the love triangle. That's how much I despise sibling love triangles. Sarah Rafferty is great, and she also presented at the Golden Globes with the rest of the Suits cast, and I love that they're getting this resurgence of recognition. Kate, who was your Woman of the Week, if you have one?
I didn't watch a ton, but I will go ahead and say Annabeth from Percy Jackson.
Yeah.
Really, it's just because more than anything in that show, I mean, she's Athena's kid. She is Athena in surrogate in the story. I love those kind of characters. Um, she is continuously getting kind of just beat down and downtrodden by the world and by her relationship with her mother, which is deeply complicated and sad. But she is kind of the wise character. She is the know-it-all, and that is deeply charming to me. So I love that character.
It's also adorable. Okay, Kate or Carey, take it away. Who is your Woman of the Week?
Um, I have one and a half women of the week, right?
Okay.
So my woman of the week is, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing her last name correctly, but it's Kristen Yushak, I think
Okay.
is how it's pronounced. And I only
Sounds
know
right.
that because she's apparently married to Kyle Juszczyk, who plays fullback for the 49ers.
Yep.
But she is the one who she made the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, Kansas City Chiefs jacket that has apparently taken the world by storm. Um,
Hmm.
and the crazy thing about it, and the reason why I say it's like one and a half, is because I'm going to give Kyle some credit here, and I know this isn't the place to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because when that coat or when that jacket started gaining steam around all the socials, he made a point of pointing out that that jacket was made by one Kristen Yushak. So if
Hmm.
you're going to be supporting your woman like that, then I have to give you a little bit of love too. And I will say this, it's not a secret. I'm not a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Has nothing to do with Taylor Swift. I'm just not a fan of like teams that continue to win all the freaking time. But yeah, the jacket was freaking cool. It's nice that she's getting credit for it. I don't know exactly if that's like her, like what she does, if that's her, like, if that's the thing that she does, but I can only imagine it's freaking about to take off tenfold. And of course, he's got to support his woman because she's supporting him, and it's probably going to be ended up making more money than he's ever made anyway. So there you go. That's who my woman of the week is. Christian Yushak. If you don't have to worry about how she spells her name. Just type in who made Taylor Swift's Kansas City Chiefs jacket. It'll be the first thing that pops up.
Yes, I loved everything about that. I loved the jacket. I loved that she was getting recognition. She's made a lot of custom pieces for other NFL, or I think even outside of NFL, but in the sports world. I know she made this really cool puffer vest for Simone Biles, whose husband plays for the Green Bay Packers, and he thinks we've heard of him when we've only heard of Simone Biles. Another news story for another day. But it was fantastic. She even put like a little Olympic logo on it for her. She's just made the most like thoughtful, creative, but also like appropriate for the event. So this was like a big puffer coat for an extremely cold day. There was a matching one for Mahomes' wife. It was really great. It's great to see her get that recognition. And I love that within this story we have so many cases of men just like overtly and proudly supporting their wives or girlfriends or whatever. We saw Mahomes and Kelsey walking out with Brittany and Taylor on Jacket Day, and they've been really public about their support of their wives, even when, even Mahomes' wife gets sometimes some flack for, cheering loudly at games or whatever guys decide to be mad at for that week. We saw Kyle supporting his wife, and he was on it, was so proud of it. So great. And another great example that Stormy mentioned in the chat at the top of the hour was Jason Kelsey, which is Travis Kelsey's older brother. He just played his last game in the playoffs this week. And that was just a really sweet moment. He's likely retiring. He, I think, is like one of the oldest NFL players currently still playing right now. But he has been just such a great positive example of like loving his wife and family, really being like a fantastic, support for that team. And, because of all of this sort of pop culture attention that the Kelseys are getting right now, it'd be really easy for guys to either not handle it well, even if they are good people, or if they're not good people, for that to come out. The spotlight kind of brings that out, and that family and those guys, and far be it from me to praise them, have handled it just absolutely flawlessly. And the emotional transparency that they've had when they're talking about whether it be the Super Bowl win last year or Jason's possible retirement or whatever. It's just no notes, 100 out of 10. Just finally, there's a guy that I will temporarily not complain about. Thank you all for joining me and staying slightly over. I am so excited to chat again in 2 weeks-ish when things start returning. In particular, The Irrational comes back. No one but me cares, but The Bachelor comes back. I'm not even sure if I care. The Bachelor's pretty lackluster. The guy they cast, I don't think I can pick him out of a lineup, if we're being honest. And several other shows. And Miss Scarlet and the Duke will continue. So, talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.